Welcome back, guys. Today's the 30th day, and this is our last day today. So we jump right into it. A day of prayer for all the faithful departed, especially for those who died during this month. We have now come to the last day of the month of the Holy Souls. Let us not, however, cease to interest ourselves in their behalf, but on the contrary, let us redouble our zeal in their favor, that we may procure for ourselves the many blessings in this life and the next, which are the reward of this devotion. And let us seek to engage many others in the same. It is the common opinion of the fathers and doctors of the church that those who frequently and perseveringly interest themselves for the souls in purgatory will not be lost. Oh, security to be desired. The extreme severity of the punishment of purgatory is a consideration which leads the mind to contemplate the immense multitude of the saved, and those saved with very imperfect dispositions, as the only solution of these chastisements. Purgatory goes as near to the unriddling the riddle of the world as any one ordinance of God, which can be named. Difficulties are perpetually drifting that way to find their explanation, and the saints of God have turned so full a light upon those fields of fire that the geography of them seems almost as familiar to us as the well-known features of the surface of the earth. The charitable practices of Catholic devotion lead us to spend so much of our day amid the pages of that beautiful suffering that it has become to us like the wards of a favorite hospital, with its familiar faces brightening at the welcome words of consolation. It is the same fire as hell, that in itself is a terrible reflection. The revelations of the saints depict the tortures of it as fearful in the extreme. There is a consent of them as to the immense length of time which souls average under that punishment, a consent fully bearing out the practice of the Church in anniversaries and foundations for masses forever. The very slightest infidelities to grace seem to be visited there with the acutest sufferings. God Himself has bidden His saints to honor with chaste fear and exceeding awe the rigors of His justice and the requirements of His purity in that land of bitter long delay. Now, does it come natural to us to look at all this system, this terrible eighth sacrament of fire, which is the home of those souls whom the seven real sacraments of earth have not been allowed to purify completely? Does it come naturally to us to look at it all as simply a penal machinery invented for the saints, and those most like the saints, to cut away with its vindictive sharpness the little imperfections which come of human frailty? That it should fulfill this office is most intelligible, most accordant with God's perfections, and most consolatory to souls themselves. But does not the view at once recommend itself to us that it was an invention of God to multiply the fruit of our Saviour's passion, that it was intended for the great multitudes who should die in charity with God, and but in perfect charity, and therefore that it is, as it were, the continuance of deathbed mercies beyond the grave, and that, as such, it throws no uncertain light on the cheering supposition that most Catholics are saved, especially of the poor, who sorrow and suffer here? Do we ever dwell in thought on God's unaccountable contentment with so little as requisite for salvation? Of course, purgatory goes some way toward accounting for it, but very far from the whole way. Purgatory seems too good for ungenerous souls, and yet they are crowding into it by thousands and become beautiful amid its flames. The merits and satisfactions of our dearest Lord seem our only refuge when we see how low it has pleased God to put the terms of our redemption. The charity of Jesus covers the multitude of the sins of His people. God sees the world through Him, not simply by affection, imputing to us the holiness that is our Lord's, but for His sake, and by the efficacy of His blood, actually ennobling our unworthiness, and giving a real greatness to our littleness, and a solid value to the merest intentions of our love. It is the daily delight of His justice to be limited in the operations of its righteous anger by the adorable sacrifice of the Mass. And the glory of Jesus is the grand fundamental law of all creation. Yet, even so, God's contentment with so little from us is an inscrutable mercy. Who shall tell the thousands of souls in heaven at this hour whom, almost to their own surprise, that marvelous contentment has exalted there? How shall we define God's golden attribute of mercy? Is it not the one perfection which we creatures give, or seem to give to our Creator? How could He have mercy, were it not for us? He has no sorrows that want soothing, no necessities that need supplying for. He is the ocean of interminable being. Mercy is the tranquility of His omnipotence and the sweetness of His omnipresence, the fruit of His eternity, and the companion of His immensity, the chief satisfaction of His justice, the triumph of His wisdom, and the patient perseverance of His love. Wherever we go, there is mercy, the peaceful, active, broad, deep, endless mercy of our Heavenly Father. If we walk by day, we walk in mercy's light, and we sleep at night in the lap of our Father's mercy. The courts of heaven gleam with our prolific beauty. Earth is covered with it, as the waters cover the bed of the stormy sea. Purgatory is, as it were, its own separate creation, and is lighted by its silvery beams gleaming there through night and day. Even the realm of hopeless exile is less palpably dark than it would be did not some excesses of mercy's light enter even there. How solemn and subduing is the thought of the holy kingdom of purgatory, that realm of pain. There is no cry, no murmur, all is silent, silent as Jesus before his enemies. We shall never know how we really love Mary till we look up to her out of those deeps, those veils of dread mysterious fire. Beautiful region of the Church of God, lovely troop of the flock of Mary, what a scene is presented to our eyes when we gaze upon that consecrated empire of sinlessness, and yet of keenest suffering. There is the beauty of those immaculate souls, and then the loveliness, the worshipfulness of their patience, the majesty of their gifts, the dignity of their solemn and chaste sufferings, the eloquence of their silence, the moonlight of Mary's throne lighting up their land of pain, an unspeakable expectation, the silver-winged angels voyaging through the deeps of that mysterious realm, and above all, that unseen face of Jesus, which is so well remembered that it seems to be almost seen. What a sinless purity of worship is here in this liturgy of hallowed pain. There are revelations which speak of some who are in purgatory but have no fire. They languish patiently, detained from God, and that is enough chastisement for them. There are revelations too, which tell of multitudes who are in no local prison, but abide their purification in the air, or by their graves, or near altars where the Blessed Sacrament is, or in the rooms of those who pray for them, or amid the scenes of their former vanity and frivolity. If silent suffering, sweetly, gracefully endured, is a thing so available on earth, what must this region of the Church be like? Compared with earth, its trials, doubts, exciting and depressing risk, how much more beautiful, how much more desirable that still, calm, patient realm over which Mary is crowned as Queen, and Michael is the perpetual ambassador of her mercy. Father Faber. A pious girl had long mourned the death of her unfortunate father, a zealous revolutionist who was drowned in the river Seine in 1793 by two men, his companions in guilt. Thus was he suddenly overtaken by death in the midst of a wicked life. His daughter, having retired to a village in Burgundy, there spent her days in working for the poor and in praying most perseveringly for her unfortunate father. Although she had every reason to fear for his salvation, she had very little hope, but prayer was a sweet and powerful consolation to her filial, affectionate heart. At length, after many years had elapsed, her father appeared to her one day, asking for masses, many masses to be said, for he told her he was in purgatory. God had given him grace in his last moments to see the evil of his past life, and with a truly contrite heart he implored his mercy and forgiveness. The poor girl, comforted, went in all haste to the parish priest and begged him to say and to get said without delay as many masses as possible for her intention. The priest hastened to comply with her request. Several masses were said daily, and some weeks later, the poor man appeared again to his daughter, but this time bright and joyous. He thus addressed her: "I bless you, my child. My sufferings are at an end, and I am now going to heaven." What consolation, what joy for the heart of this good girl! The meritorious works and prayers which she had offered, foreknown by God, had no doubt obtained for her father's guilty soul the movement of sincere contrition, which had secured his eternal salvation at the hour of death. Père, for S.J. Les Consolations de Purgatoire. The monk of Messina. In the year 1784, there was a terrible earthquake at Messina. Houses were thrown down, many lives were lost, the very graves were opened. The only thing which escaped was the cathedral, and the people attributed its safety to a miracle. A few years after this event, the Chevalier, a man of noble French family, one of whose brothers was a distinguished general officer, and the other a minister at Berlin, visited Messina for the purpose of seeing the scene of devastation and of making researches among the monuments and ruins. He was the author of the Knights of Malta and the priest, a man of high character, a cultivated intellect, and of great physical courage. He arrived at Messina on a fine summer day, and getting the key of the cathedral from the custode, for it was after Vespers, commenced copying the inscriptions and examining the building. His researches occupied him so long that he did not see the day was waning, and when he turned to go out by the door through which he had come, he found it locked. He tried the other doors, but all were equally locked. The custode, having let him in some hours before, and concluding he had long since gone away, had locked up the building and gone home. The priest shouted in vain. The earthquake had destroyed all the houses in the neighborhood, and there was no one to hear his cries. He had therefore no alternative but to submit to his fate, and make up his mind to spend the night in the cathedral. He looked round for some place to establish himself. Everything was of marble, except the confessionals, and in one of these he ensconced himself in a tolerable, comfortable chair, and tried to go to sleep. Sleep, however, was not easy. The strangeness of the situation, the increasing darkness, and the superstition which the strongest mind might be supposed to feel under the circumstances effectually banished any feeling of drowsiness. There was a large clock in the tower of the cathedral, the tones of which sounded more near and solemn within the building than without. The priest, with the intensity of hearing which sleeplessness gives, listened to every stroke of the clock. First 10, then the quarters, then 11, then the quarters again, then 12 o'clock. As the last stroke of midnight died away, he perceived suddenly a light appearing at the high altar. The altar candle seemed suddenly to be lighted, and a figure in a monk's habit and cowl walked out from a niche at the back of the altar. Turning when he reached the front of the altar, the figure exclaimed in a deep and solemn voice, "Is there any priest here who will say a mass for the repose of my soul?" No answer followed, and the monk slowly walked down the church, passing by the confessional where the priest saw the face under the cowl was that of a dead man. Entire darkness followed, but when the clock struck the half hour, the same events occurred. The same light appeared, and the same figure, and the same question was asked, and no answer returned. And the same monk, illuminated by the same unearthly light, walked softly down the church. Now the priest was a brave man, and he resolved, if the same thing occurred again, that he would answer the question and say the mass. As the clock struck 1, the altar was again lighted. The monk again appeared, and when he once more exclaimed, "Is there any Christian priest here who would say a mass for the repose of my soul?" The priest boldly stepped out of the confessional and replied in a firm voice, "I will." He then walked up to the altar, where he found everything prepared for the celebration, and summoning up all his courage, celebrated the sacred rite. At its conclusion, the monk spoke as follows: "For 140 years every night I have asked this question, and until tonight in vain. You have conferred upon me an inestimable benefit. There is nothing I would not do if I could for you in return, but there is only one thing in my power, and that is to give you notice when the hour of your own death approaches." The priest heard no more. He fell down in a swoon and was found the next morning by the custode, very early at the foot of the altar. After a time he recovered and went away. He returned to Venice, where he was then living, and wrote down the circumstances above related, which he also told to some of his intimate friends. He steadily asserted and maintained that he was never more wide awake or more completely in possession of his reasoning faculties than he was that night until the moment when the monk had ceased speaking. 3 years after, he called his friends together and took leave of them. He then asked if they asked if he was going on a journey. He said yes, and one from which there is no return. He then told them that the night before the monk of Messina had appeared to him and told him that he was to die in 3 days. His friends laughed at him and told him, which was true, that he seemed perfectly well, but he persisted in his statements, made every preparation, and the third day was found dead in his bed. This story was well known to all his friends and contemporaries. Curiously enough, on the Cathedral of Messina being restored a few years after, the skeleton of a monk was found, walled up in his monk's habit and cowl, and in the very place which the priest had always described as the one from which the spectre had emerged, Lady Herbert. And so this is the end of the 30th day. Thank you guys for listening, and I think I would do a short video maybe another day, and just to give my thoughts on what I've learned so far. Thank you all for listening, and do have a blessed day today. Bye.